Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching TV Asia. I'm your host, Shoaib Zaidi, and this is our current affairs show. Yes, it's Monday, 21st of June, and 3:59. It's 4 o'clock. And let's start our show. You remember the last week there was a 47th Summit Conference in UK, the G7 Summit Conference. That is the topic we are going to discuss with our analyst, that what, why, and what happened with this G7 47th Summit Conference. Reason for this one, that after COVID, the whole world geographical and political situation has been changed. So does this G7 Summit Conference making any impact, especially how to handle the China? Because it seems to be that COVID is helping China to become a new superpower. So that's one of the topics. Plus, we also have a breaking news. Mr. Malik has that few states they are started the plan with the accepting the international student, and how the state-wise international student are going to be accepted. That is going to be part of our agenda. And the current changes in the states position and the government, that is we would like to cover also if you have some time. Let's start our show. I would like to thanks to Dr. Grant Malik. Usual, he's busy, community member, community expert, but he's with us and every week. Our second guest is Professor Grant Pitman. He's also very humble, very gentleman, and always helping us in understanding the system and sharing some information from inside. Dr. Pradhan, thank you very much, sir. Professor Pitman, thank you very much. My first question is, because we would like to inform about our viewers that what is the exact concept of the G7? Why G7 has been started? Does it started with the G3, G5, or G6, and then it reached to be G7?
Interesting question. G7 actually started in 70s in response to Nixon issues. It was basically a forum to get the countries together. It continues its tradition of getting the finance ministers of all these G7 countries coming together to have 4 meetings every year.
Right.
G7, instead of coming from G1 or 2, became G8. They brought in Russia. But
Right.
then in 2014, Russia was sent out, expelled, and so it has come back as G7 nations. G stands for group, and you will see in subcontinent, they would call G8 ministers or G7 ministers or G3 ministers, basically group of ministers that come together to do something. So G7 means group of 7 nations that have come. In this is UK, United Kingdom, USA, United States of America, Canada, Japan, Italy, France, Germany. So they generally invite in the times important nations. This time it happened in England because the current presidency of the G7 countries is with England.
Right. Dr. Malik, India is not part of G7.
No, India is not part of G7.
I'm not sharing the information. I'm asking a question. Why?
Look, G7 nations are countries that have the highest economy in the world. If you look at the profile of G7 countries, the 7 countries that I mentioned before, control 60% of the global net worth.
Right.
Very economically powerful countries. India has the numbers. Even China is not there. India has the numbers, China has the numbers, but they are not part of G7. India was invited, and India gets a special invitation all the time. India was invited this time, and Prime Minister Modi decided not to go because we are having challenges back home. Our finance minister was there, and some staffers did get impacted with COVID.
So the other country, Professor Pitman, I believe you will also add something there. Mr. Malik mentioned about that this group was generated to handle some upset in the world system, and especially he added to the Russian values to that time. Do you think that who was the originator from for this? It is USA or some small G's country they has added and make this think that they should have some kind of, and it is only economically strengthen the countries, or it G7 also supporting each other in political system?
I think the original agenda was an economic agenda, but that's changed now, and certainly defence is included these days. COVID, health is included. So I think its original objectives have been broadened out quite significantly. I think America was certainly wanting to make sure that economically that the big countries with the economic wealth were in line with each other in terms of trade and investment and those sorts of things. But certainly the last meeting held just over a week ago showed that they were talking about security issues. And certainly the Prime Minister of Australia appeared to have strong support from at least 3 or 4 of the G7 countries over China and the potential security issues in and around the Pacific and Asia areas. So I think that they initially started off over economics, but have moved on to a range of other things.
Right. Mr. Pitman, when we talk about the G7, does similar concept also use some African countries, some Asian countries also like a G7?
In the Asia Pacific area, certainly Australia is connected to India is one of them. Certainly Papua New Guinea, Tonga and Samoa and New Zealand. So that they have an Asian Pacific group who meet regularly as well. And America has been invited to the last couple of them actually because of the security issues in the Asia Pacific area.
And it's a 47th. Ultimately, you had many times to observe, follow, and do something. Or maybe when Australia is participating, you also part of the government system. Do you think that this is always based on the frequency, like annual based, not incident based, or does sometime it happen on the incident based also? If there is some major decision like in Iraq war or Libya condition, so does it always happen on this periodically, occasional based, date wise, or it sometime it happen on the incident base also?
I think it's a regular occurrence. The issue about what's on the agenda is interesting because what we don't understand is that the finance ministers meet beforehand and they preempt everything that's going to occur. And I think their foreign affairs ministers will probably meet as well. And they bring their public servants, and their public servants may have been working on a document about China security for months.
Yeah.
And documents are shared between countries. The final document would probably be shared by the country that has the major interest in it. So behind the scenes, there's a lot of discussions going on, sharing of information, including sharing intelligence as well. And then the final meeting, which is where the heads of the country meet, decide to ratify or not ratify whatever the proposal is or the recommendations are. The only criticism of that approach is, of course, that Australia may be ratifying something which the national interest may not support, or the Constitution. But generally speaking, they've signed agreements which are pretty broad, but certainly there is some concerns by the people of the nation that heads of governments may be making decisions independently of the democracy.
Dr. Malik, you mentioned the name of the group 7 countries, and again, and I know that you are keeping close eyes on the world political situation condition also. Do you think, because this question we like to address our viewers that do you think the weightage of the G7 countries, one side we have the USA, another side we have some European countries, equal, or it just a thought only? What is exactly reasoning of being together? Same power, same strength, same approach, or same interest?
Very interesting question, Mr. Zaidi. I think at times, arguably, US has its own agenda.
Right.
They use United Nations, they use all these platforms. But it's pretty common if you see all these oil-producing nations, they have their own group.
Yes.
So these are called pressure groups on world stage. They try to put pressure. When it comes to US is more of consensus player unless they have a specific thing they want to do. Like they wanted to go for Iraq war. They wanted to go for Afghanistan war. That time they went ahead in the United Nations and got the things passed. Having said that, US was very interesting player in this G7 because you have to understand President Biden was attending a foreign trip for the first time after he got elected as president. Right. Before that, you have to also keep in mind President Trump had a different kind of branding for US. So this was a softer approach. Though Mr. Biden's trip has been hailed as a big victory for US, that he was able to reconnect with a lot of nations that were unhappy with Mr. Trump's approach. He met a lot of other people from EU, from Russia. Russian president was especially invited. Of course, I'm sure everyone is aware, Australia is not part of G7. Australia was invited as a special guest there because Australia is a great country. Everybody thinks they need to have a say on world stage. What was interesting, though Australia was only a guest there, what I feel from my personal opinion, it was basically an Australian agenda that ran through this good meetings. Good. Australia walked in, it's like I came and I saw and I conquered. Australia came in, they saw and they conquered. See, Australian agenda was against China. And if you see all the decisions that have been taken in G7 meetings, they were nothing but against China.
Yeah, I like to talk about this one in later stage. Mr. Malik, another difficult question. It's a sideline question just received from one of. Look, we know that Mr. Joe Biden, you have a friendship with Joe Biden when he was just a political figure, not icon, but a political figure. And you also appreciating Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan for his decision, the way he's approaching as an educated man in the community. Okay. Now, Joe Biden, they send a message to Pakistani Prime Minister that, okay, we would like to use your land to handle them because they are leaving from Afghanistan. So do you think in this case, because both are a person where you have the positive remarks, so if they don't give the lands and they need the lands, what will happen?
If I may respectfully say, while America is, Pakistan is a sovereign nation, a self-respecting nation, a nation with a very proud history. All those countries have been used by somebody or the other. If you see during the time of Zaman Zoal-Haq and all that, it was very pro-America nation. America needs certain platforms in that area. I would have, and you understand my admiration for Prime Minister Imran Khan. I think he should step up. I would, if I were the Prime Minister of Pakistan, I would step up and be part of negotiation so I can ensure some influence for myself. So Pakistan should step up, be a major player in the negotiations that are happening, and then be able to carry some influence. Their neighbors. Pakistan doesn't want an upset or a terrorist infected Afghanistan. It is not peaceful for Pakistan to have a country next to it that has nothing but bombs and guns going off every day. So I don't like to say I disagree with Prime Minister's decision. I encourage him to become part of the peace process or part of the negotiations that are going on.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer, and I keep a surprise question for you. I think Mr. Malik is the best person because he know both people and he appreciating. And again, when sometime the decision is coming that you are two good friends having two different sides. And coming back to Professor Pitman, we know Dr. Bernard Malik also mentioned just now that seems to be that G7 agenda was to listen Australia and then see what they are asking and look what they are expecting from the state world leadership, and seems to be happening there. But we will see that if everything is going against China, because I read an article and they says that because China is supporting more than 50 countries with the funding, and they are providing different structure, infrastructure support and everything there, and especially making a way for themselves. And especially in Pakistan, in EPIC, they also provided a lot of money, and they're trying to arrange a stage there for them so they can move easily. Similarly, some concept came out after this summit, and the international world, especially the G7 country, they would like to offer a bigger packages for these countries for the same in the same understanding like the China. So, do you think that they would like to first offer something like China offer, and then to do something?
Uh, Australia and China generally have had a good relationship for decades. I think the issue, probably from the Australian point of view, came down to its security and intelligence area, which
Right.
felt that China was probably becoming too involved in our politics and our national security. And as a result, there's been more discussion about China's assets and leasing and opportunities in Australia. And that goes from mining to owning ports. There was discussions about the telecommunication systems, about building roads here. And so I think Australia reacted to all of that, what was going on. And certainly Papua New Guinea has indicated mining and building fisheries factories up in their area. And certainly some of the islands, I believe Tonga has quite a good business dealings with China in delivering a lot of food and other benefits there. And I'd imagine some of the other island nations have too. And I think that New Zealand has concerns as well. New Zealand, although it isn't the bank, what I mean by the bank giving money to the islands, they've provided a lot of governance over many years. And so I think the Australian politicians are just concerned on the Chinese agenda, whether it be economic, security, military, debt trapping is the term they use. So I think the Australian government wants just to make sure the countries around them are being supported, but not to the point where another country may have too much influence in the outcome of their decisions.
Right, right. Dr. Bernard Malik, China and India, when the conflict started or minor conflict started, people feel it's a smoke only and nothing going to be happen. And look like that now this is not a smoke, this has become a heat, and heat moved from the India-China conflict to Australia-China conflict, then India, US-China conflict. So look like that it's raising, and somehow the heat temperature is rising and going to the different countries also. Do you think by this, if it is really going in this direction, and the profile says that if this is a trend, do you think there will be a power shift after 5-10 years? There will be a different power shift, or maybe power force or power fight or power battle going to be started?
Mr. Zaidi, if I am not a good man, it doesn't take long time for people to find that out. I can pretend to be nice, but if
Yeah.
it's not within me, people will find it out. That's happening in China's case. I do not know if you remember going back to 1962. Of course, you were not born that time, but Nehru had made a trip to China. Nehru was
Right.
Prime Minister of India. And it was what a celebratory trip. Everybody was so happy in China. They had great meetings, and the concept came out Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai means Chinese and Indians are brothers.
Right.
He lands in India. By then, China had already attacked India. No
Mm.
provocation, nothing. How do you trust somebody and call them a friend? You are celebrating and you come home and you've been attacked. China somehow has a very weird policy of owning everything. Like America goes everywhere else. Pakistan will go and help friends without any motive. India will go and help friends. India, before it itself got hit with the massive COVID issue, was giving COVID
Vaccine,
vaccines to all these countries,
including Pakistan.
including Pakistan or even PNG or countries around where people didn't have it. That is something called goodwill gesture. If I believe it's written in the Bible, if God has given you more and more is expected of you. If you're blessed more, you give out more. Having said that, China has a weird policy that they want to come, and you can understand the Road Belt Initiative. What they do is they come. Lot of these ports are being taken over by China in many countries, including
Yes.
Pakistan.
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
here you had a Road Belt Initiative agreement with the Victoria, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison came and passed a law, and now the deal has been nullified. So when it comes to power shift, yes, people are trying to find now and learning it in a hard way. And you know what this impact. If today people are locked up in a lot of countries, if people do not have food to eat and people are suffering because there is not enough oxygen, if people are suffering in the hospitals, either because infrastructure is not there, health workers are not able to keep up with all the stuff that is happening because of China. It started in China. Interestingly, if I may take it longer to explain, President Biden came out and speaking against China, he said, continuing lack of transparency from China could lead to another pandemic.
Mm.
If China had been very transparent when it happened, we would have had enough learning, informed decisions today when we could minimize the damage. See, accidents would happen. No one can guarantee an accident-free life, whether it's life or a country. But the problem is, if enough information is not there, you cannot make another accident go away.
Right.
Right? That is why we deal with what we have. But if we have enough information, the loss of life would have been less.
Yes.
So China came out, if you remember, last year, their death toll was going up. It was like population clock at All India Institute Junction.
Junction.
If you have been to New Delhi, I do not know if you, and I am not sure if Professor Pitman has been, you drive around in Delhi. And one of the main junctions, main chowk is in front of All India Medical Institute. And on the right-hand side, you will see a big board that says population clock. And when your car stops at the red light, it keeps going. So by the time your light changes, there have been probably 5,000 people added to India's population or more. So this is what happens in real life with China. You know, if China is not checked, their clock is running. If
Right.
China, there was an issue with the Philippines. They name a country they don't have an issue with. They go out, they add, they buy their places, they add. If you don't agree to it,
Yes.
they will force.
Yes.
Where this Dr. Pitman mentioned the word called debt trap, from where it has come? It is China. Because they go, they lend you the money, and they want to own you. I still remember there was a conversation between Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State, and Kevin Rudd here. And Kevin Rudd, though he spoke Mandarin and all, everybody was not happy with China anyway internally. So he made a comment to Mrs. Clinton. He said, "Oh, China is being very aggressive." And Mrs. Clinton said, "Look, there is not much we can do. How do you control your banker?" And there is a joke, and I'm sure the facts and figures are good. America owes so much money to China. At one time, China suggested, we'll sign off your debt if you can write off California to us. So give us California and we'll sign off your debt. And consider California, because of the size of the state and the population and the size of its economy, is, I think, 13th biggest economy in the world. Or even, I could stand corrected, I could be very well corrected, even smaller than that. So consider the influence China is buying. America has influence. America will come to you. They will make friends with you, but they will not harm you. They will not like to own you. Give me one country where America has gone and owned. America is happily leaving Afghanistan, and now Afghanistan is saying, "Don't leave us." This is the whole problem. So I think you need to see, people are very easily able to see, a rogue China or a notorious China is not for anybody's benefit, including China's benefit. China is gaining enough by producing a large scale of goods at a very lower price. And people are happy to buy that.
Yes.
They're very good at reproducing goods. I remember reading an article in Times Magazine a few years back that they said, you take a very sophisticated thing to China and they will reproduce it by copying it even better than that within 2 weeks. So they're brilliant people, really good people, honest in terms of their work. There are no labor laws, so they can have cheaper cost of goods. But yes, China need to be watched. As you said, Mr. Zaidi, there will be power shift in the world as they're trying to know new things that are coming out about China.
Right. Last question on this topic to Professor Pitman. Professor Pitman, Dr. Manad mentioned power shift and debt trap. Do you think that after G7 conference, we are going to see some after effects also in terms of implementation of some kind of new strategy against China, or it is going to be underground strategies and which appear as a tree at any time?
You've asked a tough question there. So I think there are two levels. One is there'll always be the behind the scenes strategies, and there'll be watching briefs and suggestions and recommendations from governments around the world as to what they do with China.
Right.
Then there'll be the more formal approach where they will target China's industry, whatever it is. The difficulty they've got, and history teaches this, that if you look back to the pre-World War II, you've got Japan, Italy, Germany, probably to a little bit of a degree Russia, but those three countries were generally, Japan was military orientated. The other two, although they had civilians, they certainly had military support, and there was an expansion policy there. And then when the big powers tried to stop their policies or stop their expansion, resulted in war. Japan, I think, is a classic for that. So on one hand, I think the governments don't want another war, but at the same time, they've got to work out how to deal with the expansion policies. America made a fundamental error with, well, one could say it's an error, with Japan when they didn't agree with their expansion and their military action into China. They stopped all oil and iron ore to them, and Japan, through their military leaders, said, well, if that's going to happen, there's only one way we can get ore and oil. We're going to have to invade all the countries around us to get it. Now, that's probably wasn't quite true. They could have bargained and worked with other countries, but instead they sent off on a military action. ultimately, of course, when America went back into Japan, they deliberately made sure that Japan was not a poverty country.
Right.
What happened to Germany and probably started the Second World War was they stripped Germany of all its wealth and all of its capability, and that supported the government there, which led to a dictator at the top of it, and away it went. So it's a balancing act between expansionists and how to control it so it doesn't become a military action.
Right. Definitely, it's a bouncing act. We discussed about the G7 country, and as I told you, Mr. Malik has some news from one of the state that how the international student are going to be arrived. So we like to know what exactly is this, and is there some news for the international student? Mr. Malik, sir, we had something about that some state are having their own individual plans to welcome the international student. Do you have some news from there?
I sure do, but I wanted to bring to your attention something interesting, because we blamed US all the time because President Trump was making certain statements against people from certain areas, geographic area of the world, not being let in. I think President Biden made a very strong statement, and he wanted G7 nations to speak against what was happening against Muslims in China. You know what has happened, Uyghur Muslims, what is known as the Muslim minority there in China, is being persecuted there. And China has put them in the camps, and they call it re-education camps. So Muslims do not have any freedom to practice their religion.
Right.
President Biden came out and made very strong statement and urged G7 nation leaders to get China to grant these people freedom. I think that was a very notable achievement of President Biden.
Definitely.
Because President Biden holds a very good platform of friendly relations, unlike President Trump. So if President Biden advocates for their freedom, it should carry a lot of message.
Yes.
All these 7 nations together came out and started asking for a reinvestigation or a new investigation into COVID against China.
Right.
And so I think those were some of the very prominent things that President Biden did. And also a lot of truth-seeking mission that Prime Minister Scott Morrison went was accomplished.
Right.
Australia as a country achieved most from this G7.
Absolutely.
Respect that they received at the G7 political platform. Yes, talking about international students, which is close to our heart because that is from where my bread and butter comes. And of course, Professor Grant Pitman is president of a higher education institute, Leaders Institute, that also is basically an international student-driven initiative. Having said that, all the universities, and you got this group of 8 universities, G8 universities, all the big universities are advocating for the students' return. I also happen to be the president of a think tank which me and Professor Pitman started. The only reason Professor Pitman is not the president because he's president of a higher education institute that is in partnership with the Policy and Research House. It's called RPH, Research and Policy House. Research and Policy House is advocating for the quick return of international students. And when international students, what we're advocating students who are either abroad because they are already studying here, or students who have been granted visas.
Right.
So we call them students, and we wrote to some of the federal members and senators, and so we see some action is happening. In fact, last week, one of the local MPs in a budget speech called Research and Policy think tank, Research and Policy House, for some feedback, and we were very successfully able to have policy influence on Queensland government.
Good.
So all the governments are coming up with their own plan, and we who live in Queensland are behind. There is no plan as such about international students. And the good news that you have is from government of South Australia.
South Australia.
Yes, South Australia is the first state within our nation, that has very successfully started out the initiative of bringing international students. South Australia gains $2 billion from international students. So it's part of a rather major part of their economy to have international students back. And the Premier has been very successfully able to negotiate with federal government, and so they will be bringing international students first there. Of course, New South Wales has been working for a very long time. The biggest recipient of international students is Victoria, where they have been working too, but it is anybody's guess when they would start coming.
Good. Dr. Pitman, international student arrival, Dr. Bernard Malik already explained that there is a state-wise plan. You've been part of the policy and procedures, and you still making influence, but in the education side at this stage. But when you be part of the polity in the system, and we would like to know this one, that why the states are doing individual decision, especially while it's related to a global issue, which is COVID. Do you think that the state has own budget, own think tank, own platform, own structure, own handling? So they are looking their capability that yes, if we accept the international student and we have this plan, and if this plan is successful, maybe it will help every state. It's like that.
I think there's a bit more to it, Zaidi. I think one of the critical issues that Dr. Bernard raised is universities were originally under the control of the states, and that changed about 10 years ago, I think.
Yes.
And institutes like the one I belong to come more under the federal government, under an agency called the Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency.
Right.
They've put out a paper that just come out in the last day or two in giving the federal government advice about international students.
Good.
And there's 4 or 5 interesting things in their paper. The first one is they still believe Australia is a great place to come to for an education and to experience the Australian way of life, and that our standards are very high.
Good.
But note that the COVID may change a range of ways we do things. Some of them were kind of interesting. One of them they're suggesting is that they may approve universities or institutions in other countries to deliver education at an Australian standard. Now, they've never ever agreed to that sort of suggestion before. But of course, what's happened is a number of the universities here in Australia have third-party agreements internationally. And they're concerned that if they don't control it, then they will lose the assurance of the standards that they have. That's the first one. The second one's an interesting one, that the research is showing that offshore students who go online are struggling with their learning.
Right.
And what they're suggesting is that Australian institutions of higher education may have to significantly improve their higher education online learning systems.
Right.
Now, they're pretty good as it is, but they're traditional. And we found that the Indian students, although they have passed the subjects here online, even though they're in India, haven't done as well as if they were here in Brisbane. Another development which is interesting is they're recommending that the digital transformation policy be upgraded in Australia, so that when a student arrives in Australia, they get a number, which they do now anyway, but they will get a number which can be moved between their arrival through the education system, through the immigration system to employment, so that it's a seamless approach to going through. Whereas at the moment, you've got to fill out this documentation and go to that website. So they're actually proposing, and this policy, I believe, is due out from the Prime Minister's office in the next month or so.
Right.
And they're pushing for a better approach for students coming in through a digital platform for their education. So they're heavily pushing that as well. So they're suggesting that we've got to still have the onshore, but also we need to look at offshore, but tying our digital transformation systems to the departments in government so the transition is much easier. So it's an interesting document. It certainly gives another government department's perspective about what should happen with students coming to Australia and students staying offshore.
Right. So it means that, Mr. Malik, when Dr. Bernard Malik, this is the last question of our show today. So when he says the electronic digital number is similar to the USI system, like you have one USI and then it's move around and all the time, every study you are going to record on the USI. But Professor Pitman mentioned that it is going to be employer, it is going to be immigration. So it's something different is coming.
I guess you have done your TA4, you understand what USI number is.
Yes.
USI number is only for wet sector, vocational education. When you come to higher education, that's why the USI basically unique student identifier.
Yeah, that's why it's come.
If Professor Pitman is saying this thing, yes, then it will become mandatory for students that come to higher education also to have that. Currently, it's mandatory. A college or an institute cannot award a diploma without USI.
Right.
So it's a unique student identifier number. And it is good actually that way. All your achievements in terms of your certificates are listed under that. So if you go there, you will find it.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard Malik. Viewers, we have some breaking news also, but we would like to discuss next week because things are changing. We have a chief health officer. She is a health officer of Queensland. She has been surprisingly promoted by Honorable Premier as a governor, and I think that's she's going to be start soon. And similarly, there are many other changes are coming, and we would like to see that what happening till next week, definitely. And we would like to see why these changes are going to happen. So by this time, this topic is for you and as well as for my guests, and we were going to have a good preparation that okay, what is the meaning of these changes? Does it is a kind of political game also to winning the heart of the people and promoting good figures? They're really doing good work in the community. Definitely, today's show we discuss and we cover arrival of the international student, and there was, I think, as Dr. Bernard Malik mentioned, there is a hope and positive move, and Professor Pitman explained it very clearly that what happening and how and what kind of policy matter is going to be referred by themselves also. We also discuss about the G7, and we know that some after effects will going to be seen soon, how the world leadership is going to handle the China, and that's ultimately whenever it has happened, it will be part of our show. And I believe that this is one of the best show in our community channels. And you, thanks for your liking. Keep watching TV Asia. Till then, next week, it's a goodbye from Shoaib Zaidi. Thank you, Dr. Bernard Malik. Thank you, Professor Pitman, sir. Thank you.